They walked up to gate 12, calm, dignified, holding first-class tickets and a small gold bag for their grandmother. But the gate agent barely glanced at them. She blocked their path without checking a single ticket, deciding in an instant that this black family didn't belong up front. The mother tightened her grip on her daughter's hand. The son lowered his gaze. And the father. Malcolm Anderson simply said 6 quiet words. "I'll make just one phone call." No shouting, no argument. Moments later, boarding stopped cold. The agent who thought she held all the power found herself face to face with the people she never expected and the consequences she couldn't escape. Before we dive into the full story, comment below where you're watching from today, and if you love stories about quiet strength, flipping injustice on its head, make sure to subscribe and turn on the bell so you never miss a new one. The hum of the airport buzzed low and steady around Gate 12. Passengers shuffled bags, children clutched travel pillows, announcements echoed over the PA system, the usual rhythm of a busy terminal. Yet when the Anderson family stepped into view, the atmosphere seemed to shift almost imperceptibly. They were a black family, elegant, poised, unmistakably dignified. Malcolm Anderson led the way, tall and composed in a navy wool coat that caught the light with every step. His wife Tasha walked beside him, her natural curls tucked under a soft gray cashmere scarf that framed her face with quiet grace. Their teenage son Jaden wore a neatly pressed jacket and khakis, while little Amaya skipped alongside, clutching a shiny gold gift bag that shimmered under the terminal lights. Inside that bag was something precious, a handmade quilt stitched by their grandmother, ready to be presented at her birthday dinner. A small, simple gift, carrying generations of love. The Andersons moved with the ease of a family used to carrying more than just luggage, carrying history, resilience, and the hope of generations who had fought for moments like these. A flight, a visit, a seat earned with dignity. Their smiles were soft, their excitement evident in the tender glances they exchanged. Malcolm reached down to adjust Amaya's backpack. Tasha whispered something that made Jaden smile. It was a small, sacred moment, but not everyone saw it that way. Behind the sleek marble counter, Carla Monroe stood rigid. Her blue uniform sharply pressed, her ID badge gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights. As the Anderson family approached, her smile froze polite but thin, stretched tight by something deeper. Carla's eyes flickered from Malcolm's dark skin to Jaden's proud stance, then to the delicate gold bag swinging in Amaya's hand. A cascade of assumptions building silently before a single word was spoken. She didn't lean forward with a greeting as she had for others. She didn't reach for the boarding passes extended politely toward her. Instead, she stiffened her posture, growing colder, her arms folding across her chest like a wall. Tasha caught the change immediately. Years of experience had taught her to recognize when they were no longer simply travelers, but problems in someone else's mind. Jaden shifted nervously. Amaya, blissfully unaware, swung her bag back and forth, the crinkling tissue paper sounding impossibly loud. Tasha exchanged a glance with Malcolm, a glance full of messages. Stay calm, stay steady. We've been here before. Malcolm, rooted in quiet strength, nodded almost imperceptibly. His hand rested lightly on his carry-on handle. When they finally reached the counter, Carla didn't reach out to take their tickets. She simply gestured vaguely toward another line. "Economy is boarding over there," she said coolly, her voice clipped and dismissive. Malcolm's brow furrowed slightly, but his voice stayed even. "We're first class," he said, holding the passes a little higher, giving her the chance to reconsider. Carla barely glanced at the tickets. Her hand hovered, but never moved forward, her lips pressed tighter. In that small hesitation hung centuries of assumptions, a refusal to see them, not as who they were, but as who she had already decided they must be. Tasha tightened her grip on Amaya's hand, feeling the child's slight squeeze of confusion. Jaden stood a little taller, his jaw setting in a way far too old for 15. And Malcolm, he stayed rooted, steady, silent. Sometimes dignity was a heavier armor than anger ever could be. The storm hadn't started yet, but it was coming, and this time it would not be ignored. Malcolm extended the boarding passes again, his hand steady despite the rising heat behind his collar. The gold-embossed first-class tickets gleamed under the overhead lights, a quiet but undeniable proof. Carla Monroe didn't move to take them. She didn't scan. She didn't check. Instead, she glanced once more at the Andersons, her expression tightening, then jerked her thumb toward a far gate. "Economy's over there," she said, her tone as flat and cold as the tiled floor beneath them. Tasha stiffened beside Malcolm. Jaden's fists curled slightly at his sides. Amaya, still clutching her shiny gold gift bag, looked up in confusion. Malcolm stayed composed, lowering the tickets slightly, then lifting them again with deliberate patience. "These are first-class seats," he said, voice calm but firm. "Would you please scan them?" Passengers behind them began to shift, sensing something off. A businessman with a leather briefcase pretended to check his phone but kept glancing sideways. A middle-aged woman 2 rows back whispered behind her hand to her companion, their eyes flicking toward the family, then back to Carla. Carla's nostrils flared slightly. She leaned in as if about to comply, then pulled back, folding her arms. "Like I said, sir, economy is that way," she repeated louder this time. Heads turned now, the murmur of travel, weary passengers briefly quieting. Tasha knelt beside Amaya, smoothing her daughter's hair with gentle fingers. "It's okay, sweetheart," she whispered. But Amaya wasn't soothed. She tugged harder at her mother's hand and looked up, voice small but cutting through the heavy air like a bell. "Mommy," she said, "why can't we go?" Tasha's heart twisted. The weight of explaining "not yet, not now" pressed hard against her chest. Malcolm inhaled deeply, feeling the eyes on them, feeling the heavy silence stretch. Every fiber in him screamed to demand, to shout, to force this woman to see. But he knew better. Decades had taught him that sometimes silence cuts deeper than any protest. He met Carla's gaze squarely, refusing to shrink. "Scan the tickets," he said again, his voice even, his authority quiet but immovable. Carla hesitated, just a flicker, a tiny crack in her frozen facade. Her hand twitched toward the scanner, hovering there uncertain. Passengers behind the Andersons leaned forward slightly, pretending not to watch but unable to look away. The kind of tension that wrapped around a room when everyone knew injustice was unfolding but no one dared to speak it aloud. Tasha rose to her feet, drawing Amaya closer. Her posture was poised, regal, her scarf catching the light like a halo. Jaden moved instinctively closer to his father, standing tall, taller than most his age, his chin lifted in silent defiance. The family stood together, an unbreakable line of quiet dignity, and still Carla hesitated. Around them, the world kept moving. Gate announcements blared, wheels rolled across linoleum. A child cried near a snack kiosk, but here at Gate 12 time seemed to slow, thick with something more powerful than noise. Malcolm didn't lower his arm, he didn't plead, he didn't budge. He simply held the tickets steady. An invitation, a command, a mirror held up to every assumption Carla Monroe had made without a word, and across the gate area strangers started noticing. Noticing not because the Andersons were loud, but because they weren't. And in a world addicted to shouting, that silence screamed louder than anything else. The storm was building, and no one, not even Carla, could pretend it wasn't coming anymore. Malcolm didn't lower his arm. The boarding passes stayed extended, steady as stone. Carla Monroe shifted uncomfortably behind the counter, now her smile a brittle line. Her fingers hovered over the scanner, hesitation visible, palpable. For a fleeting second it looked like she might just wave them off again, dismiss them without another glance. But something in Malcolm's stillness and the poised silence of his family behind him made her move. With a visible huff, Carla snatched the first ticket from his hand and scanned it. Beep, a clear green light. Priority boarding. Seat 1A, first class. The small monitor flashed the confirmation like a slap. Several people in the boarding line leaned in subtly, pretending to adjust their coats or check their phones, but their ears caught every sound. Carla's jaw clenched. She grabbed the second ticket, Jaden's, and scanned it. Beep, another green light. Priority boarding. Seat 1B, first class. The facts were undeniable. Cold, sharp blinking right in front of her. And yet Carla's lips tightened. She tapped at the screen, frowning deliberately as if trying to manufacture doubt where none existed. "There must be a system error," she said flatly, sliding the tickets back toward Malcolm without making eye contact. "You'll need to step aside while we sort this out." Tasha's fingers gripped Amaya's hand a little tighter. Jaden shifted closer to his father, his eyes hard but silent. Malcolm didn't raise his voice. He didn't argue. He didn't beg. He simply picked up the tickets, stacked them neatly in his hand, and said with an even tone, "We are confirmed. 2 scans. Priority status. We will board as scheduled." Around them. More passengers paused their quiet conversations, sensing something unusual, something wrong. A teenager near the magazine stand tilted his phone slightly, camera lens peeking above the edge of a paperback book. Another woman tucked her hair behind her ear and kept recording. The energy shifted, buzzing just beneath the surface. Carla noticed the phones. Her eyes darted briefly to the gathering watchers. For a moment her mask slipped, showing something raw underneath, fear maybe, or pride too stubborn to bend. She cleared her throat sharply, trying to regain control. "I said step aside," she repeated louder this time. "For your own good." Malcolm's face didn't move. His voice remained measured. "For our own good." The words weren't loud, but they carried slicing through the low hum of the gate. Carla opened her mouth, ready to lash back, but the murmuring crowd silenced her more effectively than any argument could have. Passengers were shifting now, glancing between Malcolm and Carla, their faces a mixture of confusion, discomfort, and growing indignation. Some filmed openly, others whispered behind cupped hands. One man in a business suit at the front of the line spoke under his breath to his wife. "This isn't right." Tasha knelt beside Amaya again, smoothing her daughter's curls with trembling fingers. She whispered softly, "It's okay, baby. Mommy's here." But Amaya's big brown eyes searched the room, seeing the tension, feeling it vibrate through the air. Malcolm drew a slow breath, setting the tickets firmly on the counter between them. "You've confirmed us. You have no grounds to deny boarding. We are not moving." He wasn't shouting. He wasn't making a scene. He was simply standing immovable, undeniable, present. And somehow that quiet resistance was louder than any confrontation could have ever been. Behind Carla, another gate agent, a younger man with nervous eyes, shifted in his seat. He glanced at the green confirmation lights still flashing faintly on the monitor, then at the line of recording passengers, then back to Carla. The pressure was building, the moment growing. And for the first time it was clear that no matter how tightly Carla clung to her assumptions, no matter how stubborn her posture remained, this wasn't a storm she could simply wave away. The Andersons weren't going to disappear, and neither now were the witnesses. The air at Gate 12 thickened, heavy, electric. Even the soft airport announcements overhead seemed to fade into a dull murmur. Malcolm Holloway stood silently for a moment, letting the tension weigh exactly where it needed to. Then in a voice steady as iron, he said 5 quiet words. "I'll make one phone call, no anger, no shouting. Just a simple, inevitable promise." He turned slightly, motioning for Tasha and the kids to stay put. Carefully he stepped out of the boarding line toward a column near the window, pulling out his phone with slow, deliberate movements. Not rushed, not frantic. Around him, heads turned, eyes narrowed. Passengers leaned closer without moving their feet, pretending to scroll their screens, but not missing a single beat. Malcolm scrolled through his contacts and tapped a name without hesitation. It rang only once. "Yes," he said softly, his back half turned toward Carla and the gate agents. "Gate 12, immediate issue, discriminatory boarding denial. 4 first-class tickets verified. We are being refused boarding without cause." There was a pause, but Malcolm listened, nodding once. His voice stayed low, controlled, not angry but carrying enough force that even the nearest passengers could feel the gravity of the conversation without hearing the other end. "Understood. I'll wait here." He hung up, slipped the phone back into his coat pocket, and returned to his family, placing one hand lightly on Jaden's shoulder and giving Amaya a gentle nod. No theatrics, no scene, just resolve. Carla, meanwhile, had retreated slightly behind the gate desk, fuming, arms crossed, tapping a pen against the counter. The other gate agent, the younger one, Ryan Clements, kept his head down, pretending to adjust flight manifests but sneaking occasional anxious glances at the growing audience. Finally, Carla couldn't keep the words in any longer. She muttered loud enough for anyone within 20 feet to hear, "Always gotta play the race card, huh? Typical." The words dropped like a stone in a still pond. Passengers who had tried to stay neutral before straightened sharply. A woman near the gate gasped audibly. Another man's head snapped up from his phone, disbelief written all over his face. A murmur of voices rippled through the waiting area. Someone near the back of the crowd whispered, "Did she just say that out loud?" Another woman, younger, already had her phone raised, recording openly now. Tasha stiffened, her body tightening as if she had been slapped. She instinctively pulled Amaya closer, shielding her daughter not from danger but from humiliation. Malcolm didn't react visibly. His jaw clenched once, the only sign that the words had hit, but his eyes remained calm, unwavering. Nearby, Ryan. Clements swallowed hard and glanced around as if realizing the situation had just crossed a line that couldn't be unsaid, couldn't be undone. Passengers began to shift nervously. A few stepped back from the line altogether, unwilling to be too close to what was clearly turning into something far bigger than a boarding dispute. Whispers became conversations. Phones continued to record, some subtly, others with boldness. It's all on video. She refused after scanning. Said something about playing the race card. Man, she's done. Carla noticed the attention belatedly. Her back stiffened, her face flushing a deep crimson. But instead of backing down, she turned her scorn toward the Andersons, her voice dripping with resentment. Doesn't matter who you call. First class has standards for a reason. Another audible intake of breath from the bystanders. Passengers exchanged looks, some disgusted, some furious. Some merely stunned Ryan. Clements finally dropped his clipboard and stepped backward, distancing himself from the mess unraveling at the gate. Tasha's eyes glistened with contained fury, but she stayed still, keeping Amaya close, whispering soft reassurances into her daughter's ear. Malcolm said nothing. He didn't have to. The call had been made. The wheels were already turning, and as the terminal buzzed with uneasy energy, Gate 12 and the woman still standing stubbornly behind the counter had no idea just how fast everything was about to change. The sharp ring of the gate phone cut through the tense buzz at Gate 12 like a blade. Every head in the waiting area seemed to flinch just slightly. Ryan Clements, standing frozen near the podium, hesitated for half a beat before reaching for the receiver. His hand trembled as he pressed the phone against his ear. Gate 12, Ryan speaking. There was a short, clipped voice on the other end, urgent, authoritative. Ryan's back stiffened. He swallowed visibly, then nodded, even though the caller couldn't see him. Yes, sir. Understood. He set the receiver down with a shaky hand, turning immediately toward Carla. His voice, normally timid, was urgent now, almost a whisper, but sharp enough to cut through the space between them. Stop boarding immediately. Carla, who had been standing with her arms folded and a smug look plastered across her face, turned toward him, frowning. What? She barked, not bothering to lower her voice. Ryan leaned closer, voice urgent but low enough not to alarm the whole terminal. Supervisors on the way. We're ordered to stop boarding. Now. Carla's face paled. Passengers, sensing the shift, shuffled awkwardly. Some pretended to scroll through their phones, but their camera lenses peaked just above the tops of their screens. Others leaned subtly toward the gate, trying to catch every word, every flicker of panic crossing Carla's face. Tasha Holloway felt Malcolm's hand tighten slightly on her shoulder, a silent, reassuring gesture. Amaya clutched the gold gift bag closer to her chest, her wide brown eyes darting from her parents to the gate agents. At the far end of the corridor, two figures appeared, moving with quick, deliberate steps. One wore the signature navy blue jacket with the gold ground supervisor emblem, Antonio Reyes, known across the terminal for being firm but fair. Beside him, two uniformed airport security officers kept pace, their expressions unreadable, hands resting near their belts. The crowd parted slightly as they approached, a ripple of movement fueled by a mix of curiosity and anxiety. A few passengers straightened their backs, pretending to busy themselves with boarding passes, but their phones were still recording discreetly, pointed at the unfolding scene. Carla saw them coming and immediately straightened her posture. She forced a bright, professional smile onto her face, but it faltered under the weight of the stares boring into her. Antonio Reyes didn't waste time. He walked directly to the podium, speaking in a low, tight voice. Only Carla and Ryan could hear, but the energy around them said enough. Passengers craned their necks, holding their breath. "What the hell is going on here?" Antonio demanded. Carla opened her mouth to answer some prepared excuse about system errors and misunderstandings, but Antonio raised a hand, cutting her off mid-breath. "Save it," he snapped. "We've been informed. We have a situation." His eyes darted to Malcolm, Tasha, Jaden, and little Amaya, standing tall, composed, and silent a few feet from the gate. He turned back to Carla, his voice dropping lower. "You denied first-class passengers without verification. You made comments. And now?" He glanced around, seeing the blinking red recording lights on several phones. "Now it's public." Carla's face flushed deep crimson. Her mouth opened, then closed again. Antonio turned sharply to Ryan. "Secure the gate. Hold the flight. Do not allow another passenger through until instructed. Copy." Ryan nodded so hard it was almost a bow. "Copy, sir." Antonio then motioned subtly to one of the security officers. The officer moved closer to Carla, standing just behind her, not touching but making it very clear. "You're not in charge anymore." The energy at Gate 12 had shifted completely. What had been a boarding line just minutes ago was now an audience. Watching whispering, recording passengers who had tried to stay out of it earlier were now fully invested. A woman in a business suit murmured to her companion, "She's done." A college kid in a hoodie muttered, "They better comp those tickets." An older man nearby simply shook his head, his arms folded tight across his chest. Meanwhile, Malcolm Holloway remained exactly where he had been. He didn't push, he didn't boast. He simply stood with his family, his presence saying louder than any words, "We're not moving. We're not wrong." Antonio turned to them, then his expression changing, respectful, serious. "Mr. Holloway, Mrs. Holloway, on behalf of West Air, I sincerely apologize for the treatment you've received. We are handling this immediately." Malcolm nodded once, a small but significant movement. No smile, no triumph, just calm, collected acknowledgement. The entire terminal seemed to exhale. But it wasn't relief. It was the quiet before the next wave, the moment everyone realized this wasn't just about a boarding pass anymore. Something much, much bigger was happening, and no one at Gate 12 would be able to pretend they hadn't seen it. Antonio Reyes turned fully toward Carla Monroe, his stance wide, his voice carrying just enough that the passengers pressing closer could catch every word. "Did you verify their boarding passes?" he asked, slow and deliberate. Carla swallowed hard. Her hands fidgeted with the hem of her blazer. A few beats of silence stretched between them so thick it felt like the whole terminal was holding its breath. She started glancing around as if searching for an escape hatch that wasn't there. I glanced. I assumed. She cut herself off, realizing too late how that sounded. "You assumed?" Antonio repeated, voice steady, but loud enough now that several passengers in line openly leaned forward. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. The weight in his tone was heavier than any raised voice. Antonio extended his hand sharply toward Ryan, who still clutched the boarding passes Malcolm Holloway had originally offered. "Give me those." Ryan scrambled to comply, handing over the 4 crisp, laminated tickets. Antonio took them one by one, scanning them through the podium's handheld device. Beep, first ticket. Priority Elite, 1A beep. Second ticket. Priority Elite, 1B beep. Third ticket. Priority Elite, 1C, beep. Fourth ticket. Priority Elite, 1D. Each green light flashing brighter than the last, each beep ringing out like a hammer blow. The screen confirmed it in bold letters after every scan. Priority Elite, first class, pre-boarding cleared. Antonio turned the screen so Carla could see it, so that everyone could see it. The glow of the green confirmation reflected faintly on her pale face. "You didn't just assume," Antonio said, his voice low, measured, devastating. "You denied a fully cleared Priority Elite family their right to board based on nothing but your own judgment." Carla's mouth moved, but no sound came out. Her cheeks burned a furious red, stark against the sterile airport lighting. She looked like a small figure drowning in a flood. She had unleashed herself. The terminal, already tense, seemed to shift again. A low murmur rolling through the boarding line like distant thunder. Phones tilted higher. Whispers got louder. "I knew it. Unbelievable. Look at her now." Antonio didn't waste another second. He stepped around the podium, facing Malcolm, Tasha, Jaden, and little Amaya. The contrast between the two sides of the confrontation couldn't have been sharper. The Holloways standing tall and composed, Carla shrinking into herself. "Mr. Holloway," Antonio said, bowing his head slightly. "Mrs. Holloway, Jaden, Amaya, please allow me to personally welcome you aboard as our honored Priority Elite passengers." The formality in his voice wasn't performative. It was respect, delivered publicly intentionally so that everyone watching knew exactly who had earned it. Malcolm gave a small nod. No gloating, no triumphant grin. Just the same calm, dignified presence he had maintained from the start. Tasha smiled warmly, squeezing Amaya's hand reassuringly. As the family moved forward toward the boarding doors, the crowd around them shifted too, not out of pity, out of respect. Passengers parted like a tide, some offering small, supportive smiles, others simply bowing their heads in acknowledgement. Malcolm led the way, his back straight. Jaden followed, holding his little sister's backpack with a quiet protectiveness. And Amaya, clutching her shiny gold gift bag tightly to her chest, gave a small wave to no one in particular, just a child still trying to understand why grown-ups sometimes get things so very wrong. Behind them, Carla stood frozen at the podium, her arms slack at her sides. The security officers moved subtly closer, one of them speaking softly into a radio clipped at his shoulder. Antonio gave Carla a final look, not with anger, but with utter cold disappointment, then turned and escorted the Holloway family down the jet bridge. The tension in Gate 12 didn't release. It calcified hard and permanent. Everyone who had seen what happened would carry it with them, not as a scandal, not as drama, but as a quiet, searing truth. That sometimes the loudest exposure of injustice doesn't come from shouting, it comes from calm, quiet dignity, refusing to back down. And today at Gate 12, every assumption Carla Monroe had made, every quiet bias she thought no one would ever notice was laid bare for all to see. The first-class cabin of Flight 382 gleamed under the soft overhead lights. White leather seats, polished wood paneling, and a subtle scent of citrus cleaner filled the air, a picture of curated calm. Malcolm Anderson, his wife Tasha, their son Jaden, and little Amaya moved with quiet precision to their seats in row 1A through 1D. No flustered movements, no loud words, no signs of anger. They settled in as if they had always belonged there because they did. Malcolm helped Amaya buckle her seatbelt, his movements unhurried. Tasha placed the shiny gold gift bag carefully under the seat in front of her, smoothing her skirt as she sat. Jaden, still holding onto the backpack, tucked it neatly into the overhead bin before sliding into his seat, glancing sideways once at his father, calm, composed, unshaken. Around them, a different kind of tension was rising. Passengers who had witnessed the confrontation at the gate now looked away quickly, pretending to read magazines or adjust headrests, anything to avoid the shame of their silent complicity. And among the flight crew, an almost imperceptible current of anxiety had begun to flow. Rachel Monroe, the lead flight attendant, checked the cabin one last time before takeoff procedures. She had seen bits and pieces of the gate incident enough to know something had gone wrong. Badly wrong. As she passed the first row, she smiled warmly, a real genuine smile this time. But Malcolm simply nodded politely without engaging further. His silence wasn't cold, it was measured. Back near the galley, Rachel's work tablet buzzed sharply in her hand. She frowned. Direct messages, mid-boarding, were rare, and this one had come through the corporate operations channel, coded priority. She tapped to open it, reading the short message twice to make sure she understood. Passenger Malcolm Anderson, associate of Executive Board Member Logan Price. Handle with utmost discretion. Full report to follow. Rachel's breath caught in her chest. Logan Price, one of the airline's most powerful stakeholders, a man whose signature had greenlit recent aircraft purchases and expansion routes. A man who didn't just move within the airline's upper ranks. He was one of the reasons it existed today. And Malcolm Anderson wasn't just any passenger. He was someone very, very close to the top. Rachel swallowed hard and immediately signaled the other flight attendants, briefing them in hushed tones without revealing too much. Eyes sharp, service top-notch, she whispered. No delays, no questions, trust me. Back in the cockpit, the tension found its way there too. Captain David Foster, a seasoned pilot with nearly 2 decades of experience, was adjusting his instruments when a light flashed on the console. Incoming priority call, corporate HQ. He tapped his headset and answered, expecting the usual clearance or weather update. Instead, a cold, clipped voice filled his ear. Captain Foster, this is Andrew Lane, office of the CEO. We're informing you that passenger Malcolm Anderson is aboard, seated in 1A. Treat this flight as elevated priority. No deviations upon landing. Crew will remain until formal debrief. Foster's grip tightened slightly on the controls. Understood, he said. The line clicked dead without pleasantries. He sat back in his chair, exhaling slowly. This wasn't a normal flight anymore. The quiet weight of significance had entered the cabin, and everyone who mattered knew it, even if the rest of the passengers didn't. Meanwhile, at the back of the plane, Carla Monroe sat stiffly in the designated crew seat, arms crossed tight, her face pale. She had tried to act like nothing had happened, fixing her gaze out the small porthole, but the glances from the other crew members told her she wasn't fooling anyone. They knew. And worse, they were distancing themselves already, instinctively preparing for what they knew would be the fallout. The plane taxied down the runway, engines humming steadily. As the aircraft lifted into the air, climbing toward cruising altitude, Malcolm sat perfectly still, looking out the window at the retreating lights of the city below. He didn't need to move. He didn't need to speak. The call had been made, the wheels had been set into motion, and now the sky itself carried the weight of what Carla's judgment had triggered, a silent reckoning traveling at 35,000 feet. The Anderson family didn't gloat. They didn't posture. They simply occupied the space they had rightfully claimed with dignity, with grace, and with a quiet strength that made everyone else shrink into themselves without a word. The cabin had settled into a strange, delicate quiet. Flight 382 cruised smoothly above the clouds, the muted chatter of passengers blending with the steady hum of the engines. But under that surface, calm, an invisible current of tension thickened with every passing mile. Carla Monroe sat alone now, wedged awkwardly into a rear jump seat near the galley. Her uniform, once a symbol of quiet authority, felt more like a costume she didn't belong in anymore. She stared straight ahead, jaw tight, hands locked in her lap. Every part of her screamed to disappear, to rewind the day, to undo the decision she had made at Gate 12. But there was no undoing it. Rachel Monroe, the lead flight attendant, moved through the aisle with measured grace, handing out drinks, offering pillows, ensuring first class received meticulous, seamless service. She didn't spare Carla even a sideways glance. Near the rear galley, whispers passed between the junior attendants like ripples across a still pond. "She's done," one of them murmured behind a stack of service trays. "HR's waiting," another replied under his breath. "You don't survive something like this. Not after today. Not with him on board." Rachel overheard but said nothing. She knew it was true. Carla sat rigid, feeling the judgment from every side. Even the other crew members who once deferred to her seniority kept their distance. Now, no eye contact, no casual comments, only the cold courtesy reserved for someone already written off. The aircraft began its slow descent into Denver International Airport. Over the intercom, Captain Foster's voice came through calm and professional. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our final descent into Denver. Please fasten your seatbelts and prepare for landing." Passengers shifted in their seats. Seatbelts clicked, but the buzz wasn't normal. Near the front of the plane, several first-class passengers quietly pulled out their phones, pretending to check emails but ready watching. In 1A, Malcolm Anderson remained composed, his face unreadable, his hands folded loosely over his lap. Beside him, Tasha gently guided Amaya to buckle her belt, whispering something soft that made the little girl smile faintly. Despite the heavy air, Jaden leaned back, eyes scanning the cabin, quiet, observant, absorbing everything. As the wheels touched down with a soft, controlled thud, Carla gripped her seat, her knuckles white. The plane taxied toward the gate. She had a sinking feeling that grew heavier with every yard closer to the terminal. Then she saw them. Through the narrow gap of the crew door window, Carla spotted two men in black suits flanking a woman in a sharp navy uniform. Their posture was unmistakable. Security. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was no regular post-flight inspection. Rachel approached from the front, her voice low but firm. "Miss Monroe, upon arrival, you are to remain seated. Security will escort you from the aircraft. You are not to interact with passengers or other crew during disembarkation." Carla's mouth opened instinctively, searching for protest, but one glance at Rachel's face stopped her cold. There would be no argument, no second chance. The seatbelt sign pinged off. Passengers rose carefully, pulling down bags, adjusting coats, murmuring softly among themselves, but eyes, so many eyes, flicked back toward Carla, pretending not to look, but looking all the same. As the first-class cabin deplaned, Malcolm and his family walked calmly down the aisle. They passed Carla without a word, without even a glance, and somehow that silence, that profound, measured absence of acknowledgement cut deeper than any insult ever could. Rachel stayed near the galley, arms folded, watching quietly. One of the junior attendants whispered to another as passengers filed out, "One bad choice. That's all it takes." "She threw away 12 years in 5 minutes," someone else murmured. Carla sat frozen, humiliated, feeling smaller with every footstep that moved past her. When the last passenger disembarked, the two security officers approached. The woman in the Navy uniform and HR liaison stood between them. "Miss Monroe," she said evenly, not cruel but firm, "you're to come with us now." Carla stood on trembling legs, smoothing her skirt as if the act could somehow patch together her shattered dignity. As she was led down the jet bridge, the same jet bridge she had once commanded passengers through with authority, her footsteps sounded hollow against the floor. Behind her, the aircraft door shut with a soft, final click, a sound that felt eerily like the last nail being hammered into her career. The Anderson family was already halfway through the terminal, walking quietly toward baggage claim. They never once looked back, because they didn't need to. The world and everyone who mattered had already seen everything. The air in the jet bridge felt thick as the Anderson family stepped into it. Gone was the tense stillness, that had cloaked Gate 12 earlier. In its place lingered something quieter but far heavier, an invisible recognition that rippled outward with every step they took. Malcolm led the way, shoulders square, head high. Tasha followed close behind, one hand resting protectively on Amaya's shoulder, the other gripping the small gold gift bag. Jaden walked beside them, tall for his age, eyes scanning the faces they passed, remembering every detail. Passengers from first class moved carefully around them, not rushing as they might have on any normal day. Some nodded subtly as they passed. Others gave small, respectful glances, the kind of silent acknowledgments that spoke louder than words ever could. A businessman in a pressed charcoal suit paused near the corridor exit. As Malcolm neared, the man leaned in slightly and whispered, voice low and sincere. "You handled that with real power, sir. Real power." Malcolm nodded, once calm, composed, not needing to say a word, because real power didn't need noise, it didn't need spectacle. It just needed to stand. As they moved through the terminal, Amaya looked up at her mother, confused by the extra attention. "Mommy, why's everyone looking at us?" she asked in a small voice. Tasha crouched down for a moment, brushing a stray curl from her daughter's forehead. "Because sometimes when you stay kind and brave, even when people aren't fair, people notice, baby," she said softly. Amaya seemed to think about that for a moment. Then she smiled, grasping her mother's hand tighter. Behind them, standing near the terminal window, Ethan Brooks watched the Anderson family disappear into the crowd. He didn't follow. He didn't even move. He just stood there processing everything he had seen and everything he had failed to do. The guilt clung to him like a second skin. When Carla had dismissed them when she had folded their tickets without scanning them, he could have spoken up. He could have insisted on checking. He could have asked questions instead of standing there letting bias and assumption play out unchecked. But he hadn't. He had stood there frozen, and now he understood why the Anderson family's silence had cut deeper than any shouted protest ever could. Because dignity doesn't scream, it doesn't shove or rage, it simply refuses to bow. Ethan swallowed hard, his throat tight, his hands useless at his sides. He knew without needing to be told this incident wouldn't be confined to one gate or one flight. It was already moving beyond him, beyond Carla, into something bigger. There would be meetings, investigations, new policies, but none of that would erase what had already happened. What mattered most was the image now burned into his mind. A black family standing firm under the weight of judgment, choosing grace over fury, commanding respect without ever raising their voices. Ethan exhaled slowly, the shame and clarity pressing down hard. For the first time in a long time, he realized that strength wasn't about authority or uniforms or titles. It wasn't about who spoke loudest or who pushed hardest. Real strength was quieter, heavier, lasting. And today it had walked straight through his terminal without needing a single shout to change everything. As he turned back toward the gate counter, he caught sight of the security team escorting Carla Monroe through a side corridor. Her face was pale, her posture sagging, and for once Ethan felt no triumph, only the heavy, aching truth. Sometimes justice isn't a roar, it's a silence that refuses to be ignored. The setting sun bathed the small white house at the end of Willow Street in a soft amber glow. Malcolm guided the family's rental car into the driveway, the wheels crunching gently against the gravel. From the porch, an elderly woman sat rocking slowly in a chair, a knitted shawl wrapped loosely around her shoulders. Grandmother Louise Anderson, 87 years old, the pillar of their family, the kind of woman whose strength was quiet but unshakable. As soon as the car doors opened, Amaya bolted across the lawn, the gold gift bag swinging wildly from her tiny hand. "Grandma," she shouted, her voice slicing through the stillness like a song. Louise chuckled, rising carefully to her feet, arms open wide. "Come here, my sweet girl." Her voice, weathered by decades but still strong, wrapped around Amaya like a blanket. Tasha and Jaden followed quickly behind, smiling. Malcolm lagged for a second, standing by the car, breathing in the moment. It was strange, he thought, how the weight of the airport, the judgment, the humiliation, the silent battle fought just hours earlier seemed to melt away in the face of this simple, timeless joy. He closed his eyes briefly, gathering himself before joining his family at the porch steps. Inside the cozy living room, the fire crackled gently in the hearth. Photos of generations lined the mantel, soldiers in uniform, church graduations, wedding days captured in faded frames, a history of dignity, a history of standing tall. Louise sat down slowly in her armchair, Amaya perched happily on the ottoman at her feet. "Now," Louise said with a grin, I hear somebody brought me a little surprise today. Amaya beamed and held up the shiny gold bag. Open it, Grandma, she insisted. Louise chuckled, taking the bag with a careful hand. Inside was a small velvet box. She opened it to find a delicate locket, a simple gold heart engraved with the initials L.A. Inside, a tiny photo of her as a young woman on one side and a photo of her late husband Malcolm's grandfather on the other. For a long moment, Louise said nothing. She simply touched the locket gently with her fingers, tracing the engraved letters. "You all spoil me," she whispered, her voice catching slightly. "You deserve every bit of it, Grandma," Tasha said, sitting down beside her. Malcolm stood by the fireplace, one hand in his pocket, the other resting lightly on the mantel. No one mentioned the airport. No one spoke of the injustice, the disrespect, or the weight they had quietly carried through that terminal. Tonight was not for that. Tonight was for warmth, for family, for legacy, for choosing to let dignity be the loudest voice in the room, even when no one else could hear it. Jaden sat cross-legged on the floor, leaning his head against the armchair, quietly soaking in the peace. Amaya giggled as Louise slipped the locket around her neck with a trembling smile. "There," Louise said softly. "Now I have you all close to my heart." The fire popped softly, and outside the night deepened. Malcolm watched his family feeling a pride so deep it settled into his bones. Not because they had made a scene, not because they had shouted louder, but because they hadn't needed to. Because when the world tried to push them down, they had simply stood, calm, unbroken, undeniable. And somehow that had been enough. As he leaned against the mantel, the final words his father once told him echoed through his mind, words passed down through generations, words now etched even deeper after today. Respect isn't requested. It's commanded by how you stand when the world tries to make you kneel. And tonight, in the quiet safety of family and love, Malcolm Holloway stood taller than he ever had before. If this story moved you, please share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories that shine a light on quiet courage and true dignity. The story of the Anderson family reminds us that prejudice and quick judgment can lead to irreversible consequences, while calm persistence and quiet strength can dismantle injustice more powerfully than anger ever could. It reminds us that discrimination, often hidden beneath layers of assumption and policy, still exists today, whether in the workplace, in the airline industry, or in the ordinary corners of everyday life. No title, no uniform, and no policy can justify looking down on others based on who they are or how they appear. In our personal lives, we should always listen first and act with fairness, not bias. In the workplace, we must uphold integrity by treating every individual with dignity and verifying before we judge. As a community, we must call out injustice, not with rage, but with clarity, unity, and unwavering principles. By practicing respect, humility, and vigilance, we can build a more inclusive and just society, one where dignity isn't requested but recognized and honored without question.